Hey, can you guys hear me okay? All right. Do I need that?
Except for your elders or
All right.
your
All right, we'll use this. Okay. I had to look see what we were talking about today. I've done a few of these in the last couple of weeks. Tonight we're going to talk about vegetable gardening. This is an interactive class. I'm going to talk. I might ask a question, and I want to, I hope to get a response from you, and then I'll do some more talking. My name's Dave Slaughter. I'm a Bell County Master Gardener. I have, besides attending Master Gardener class, I attended the Advanced Vegetable Gardening class in Tarrant County. And I have probably had a vegetable garden for more than 50 years in a variety of places across the nation. So I know everything there is to know about vegetable gardening until I go out there and I think, wow, that's different. How did that happen? Well, I did that 2 weeks ago and it worked, and now today it's not working. So I have the same problems in a vegetable garden as anybody else. Everything's a surprise. Who had a vegetable garden this year? Anybody? You don't count.
You don't count.
You don't count. Yes, ma'am. What'd you grow? Yeah, in the green.
I attempted to grow pumpkins and tomatillos and cherry tomatoes and all the aphids and squash boards were really happy.
Well, yeah, you fed them well. Okay, well, we're going to talk about insects and some of the challenges they present. Somebody else had their hand up over here. I think Denise did. Diane. I gave you a plant.
tomatoes,
What else?
Radishes, but they didn't come out. They were hot. And peppers.
Peppers. Like bell peppers or hot pepper?
Yeah, peppers.
How'd they do?
They only got about this big. That wasn't bad, but they tasted good.
Okay, well, that's all that counts.
Yeah.
All right. What type of garden did you have? Did you grow in containers or
Above ground.
above ground, like in a raised bed?
It's raised.
Raised bed?
Yeah.
How about you, ma'am? How did you grow? Not you.
I did a raised bed.
Raised bed. Anybody else do a container garden? How did it work out? Working on it.
Where I work, I can get barrels for free, so I cut them in half and I clean them out a little bit and then fill them with, well, I also get, there's a tree service that bring around, a load of, mulch, just much.
The clippings.
So I'll fill my barrels up half with that, and then I'll put some cow manure in there. It's so expensive, so I don't do that much. And then I'll try to get some soil, from any place I can find. Trying to mix it all up in there with sometimes I'll put some perlite in it. So I've got 4 of them, got tomatoes, 4 of them, I have blackberries, and the blackberries are just taking over. They're just doing great. The tomatoes, they've been really hard fast. When I first planted them, they were coming up, and I planted them in the house, I germinated them in the house, and I put them outside, and they were doing pretty good. I mean, I was expecting them to die right away, but they're coming up. But this last heat we had the past week, it just really shriveled. I don't think I'm going to get shriveled, but I don't know.
You never know. You never know. You never know. Do we have any first-time vegetable gardeners this year that came from another state? A little different here? Where'd you come from? Western Washington. Yeah, a lot different. Yeah, I lived in Western Washington for about 8 years. Yeah, it's a little bit different. I know my first year I planted potatoes. I thought I was going to be smart and plant them in May. Well, little did I know I should have been harvesting them in May and not planting them in May. So that happens. And that's why you have a planting guide, so you kind of know when to plant these things. It's a little bit different here in Texas. And then we have caliche. And then we have black gumbo. It depends on what side of the county you live on. So there's a lot of challenges. we are fortunate that our gardening year is about 250 days long. But we are unfortunate because it comes in two parts. We garden from February to roughly June, take a break through the month of July, part of August, and then we start up again. So we don't have a continuous type of garden, unless you're growing some of the really hot stuff like okra or hot peppers and things like that, and then you can garden all year. Okay, anybody see these terms before? Thunder in February means frost in April. How about Epsom salts? Who uses Epsom salts with their plants? How about eggshells? Put eggshells with your tomato plants so you end blossom rot. Put pennies in the ground as a natural fungicide. No? No. Aspirin. Aspirin improves the health of plants because of the salicylic acid in aspirin. Coffee grounds lower your soil pH. Nobody? Rusty nails adds iron to your soil. Okay. Truthfully, there's no scientific evidence to any of these. They're all just, if they work, great. But there is no scientific data. Now, pennies used to be true when pennies were copper.
Well, what are they now?
Zinc. Zinc's cheaper. But prior to about 1982, pennies were made of copper, and that used to be true. You'd put pennies in the ground or some other type of copper material. It was kind of a natural fungicide. Who grows zucchini in their garden? Tried? What happens when you ignore it for a day or two? Like that? Not that bad. Not that bad? I gave this class, but this thing rocks. I gave this class in Troy a few weeks ago. And this woman walked up to me afterwards. She goes, at our church, we never lock our doors, our car doors. And she goes, we found out we had to start locking our car doors because otherwise, when we came out after church, we'd have a bag of zucchini in our car. So she said, if you want zucchini, you don't lock your car door. If you don't need any more zucchini, you lock your car door. Okay, when you registered, you should have picked up 4 handouts. Kind of a calendar. It's not a planning guide, but it's things that you might think about doing during different months of the year. Then there is a vegetable variety selector. This is based on what Texas A&M says works for Bell County or Central Texas. And then we're going to talk a little bit about that on the next slide, where there's some other things that might work as well. And then there's a planting guide based on Bell County's weather. Typically, that planting guide, I think it says the average last frost date is the 22nd of March, and that is based on zip code of Belton, because that's where our extension office is. And then there's a reference sheet. On that reference sheet are 2 QR codes. One is for the soil lab, if you want to take a soil sample, which I recommend, and we're going to talk about soil samples, because knowing what's in your soil is very important. And the other QR code on that reference sheet is the diagnostic handbook. You can download or put it on your desktop. Because I think we've all had probably problems with plants and wondering, well, why is it turning brown? Or why is it getting yellow? Or why is it doing that? And we're going to look at a lot of those things on those plants tonight, but we're only going to talk about a few of them. So, what are we going to talk about tonight? Our agenda. We're going to talk about garden planning. We're going to talk about groups, days of harvest, how it's kind of important. Maybe you want to group these things together. If you're working in a container, it makes it kind of easy for you. Layout, rotation, succession planning, and cover crops. Nutrients. Insects. Anybody have any problems with insects? Okay, we're going to talk some about insects and some natural ways to take care of them, and some other ways that it just doesn't work. But that's what diseases. Sometimes our plants just get old and die, like us. They're an annual. For the most part, vegetables are annuals. We put them in the ground in March, and then come June, they look terrible. Well, they've had to endure a lot. The 90 degrees start probably in late April. This year we had a good year. It was a cool year. We were lucky, and we even had rain. We're going to talk about spring versus fall gardening, and then we're going to talk about some ways that you might be able to improve your gardening success. Now you see this plant right here. Let's see if I can do this. That, if you look at the vegetable selector, it says we should plant Jersey Wakefield cabbage in our gardens here. Now, if you're familiar with Jersey Wakefield, those are those cabbages that kind of look like this, kind of come up to a point, and they're actually about this size. That cabbage you're looking at right there is called Bonnie's Best. That's not Bonnie, that's April, by the way, and April's sitting right here. But that's Bonnie's Best from Lowe's. That cabbage head weighs about, 8 pounds? As opposed to the Jersey Wakefield that weighs about 2.5 pounds. So there's a big difference. So sometimes you just got to try new things and see what works and what doesn't work. Okay, planting. Okay, who's the garden going to be for? You. Okay. How much time do you have available to work the garden? Is the garden going to be out in the backyard, or is the garden going to be on the empty lot 3 blocks over and 2 blocks up? How often are you going to get there and work on that? Probably not too often. If you have twin 15-year-old daughters, are they going to help you in the garden much? I was lucky to never have daughters or granddaughters, so, but I'm assuming they probably wouldn't help much. Water. What type of water are you going to use? City water, well water, rainwater. Rainwater's the best. Why is rainwater the best? I couldn't hear all of you. No chemicals. Has almost a neutral pH, unlike our water that either comes from our wells or our reservoirs that are sitting in limestone. And then we're going to talk about pH and its effects on soil. But also, rainwater is high in nitrates. You ever notice when if anybody have a Texas sage in their yard?
Oh, yeah.
Water it once a week religiously, doesn't blossom. You get a 1/4 inch of rain, and all of a sudden it's just blossoming like crazy. That rainwater, it's like magic. Oh, what else we can talk about? Okay, modular. Modular gardening is also called square foot gardening. Anybody do a square foot garden? I don't blame you. Don't know what purpose they serve. But anyway, raised bed gardening is good for our soils here because it's like this, a caliche, or you got black gumbo if you live a little bit east of here, or you have clay. After a rain, you ever notice how sometimes the rain just sits on top for days because you have so much clay in your soil, the texture is bad. So raised beds are good because they help mitigate those things for you. And then that way you can kind of put in the soil that you want. When you're planting your garden, you kind of got to be mindful of wind too. Vegetable gardens and wind don't get along, especially if you're raising like corn. You think you could plant your rows in the way of the prevailing wind, which is predominantly south in the winter or in the summer. But then, every once in a while we'll get that weird cold front. We don't change the temperature, but we change the wind direction, and it comes out of the east. And all of a sudden our corn's just laying over. Or if you're doing trellises, if you garden vertically, wind makes a big difference. And soil test. We're going to talk a lot about a soil test because that is kind of like the beginning of your gardening venture. If you don't have a soil test, you don't know what you're dealing with. Okay, are we going to plant seeds or are we going to plant transplants? Seeds, just about available everywhere. You can get them at Walmart, you can get them at Lowe's, you can go to Belt and Feed and get them in bulk. If you got your seeds from your grandmother, because she had a box of seeds left over that she had in the attic for the last 20 years, I'd be careful. They might not be any good. But you can check your seeds to see if they're any good. There's 3 ways to check seeds. One, you can cut them in half, and if you look at them, and the inside of it, if the endosperm fills the whole shell of the seed, that means that was a viable seed. Unfortunately, you just destroyed that seed because you cut it in half. So, I wouldn't recommend cutting them in half. Another way is the float test. You drop some seeds in a packet, a handful. If it's like, well, they don't come by numbers anymore. Now they come by grams, but 3 or 4 seeds and they drop to the bottom, chances are those seeds are viable. But if you're dealing with carrot seeds or turnip seeds, if you ever planted them, you know those seeds are about the size of the end of your pencil, so they're very, very difficult. And if you ever planted milkweed seeds don't sink. They always float. The easiest way to tell if you got good seeds is to do the soak test. Put about 3 or 4 seeds in a paper towel, a moist paper towel. Put that paper towel in a baggie and let them set for a couple days. Pull them out of the baggie, you should start to see the root come out if they're any good. If that happens, you can just kind of assume the rest of that package is probably pretty good. Now, if you let those seeds stay in the paper towel a couple weeks, you're going to have problems because besides roots, you're going to have the green stuff coming out and they're going to be very hard to transplant. When we're planting seeds, can you still hear me?
Yes.
When we're planting seeds, we don't want to use, you open up that bag of Miracle Grow or Stay Green or whatever. You want to use a soilless mix for planting seeds. Now this mix right here is half and half. This is half vermiculite and half peat moss. This is what the Master Gardener Handbook recommends. Now you can buy seedless mixes at Walmart. You can buy them in a variety of places. When you're growing your seeds, you can use containers. I like these containers here, these silicone containers, because they're very flexible. You can push your pots out. And the nice thing about these, when you're home alone and the wife's not there, you can put them in the top rack of the dishwasher and they get washed. That's true. It works well. And that's the nice thing about it. But when you're using containers like this and reusing containers, you need to wash them with soap and water first. Get them clean. And then you need to dunk them in a 10% solution of bleach and water because you need to disinfect them. You need to kill that bacteria that might be lingering. Bleach. Now, a dishwasher, there's enough bleach in those dishwasher pellets to kill all that stuff. Another way.
Does it matter what kind of bleach? Splashless bleach or regular?
It doesn't matter. As long as it's 10% bleach. Now, some other ways, if you're a environmentalist and you don't like to use pots and you don't like to use plastic, etc., you can use these soil blocks. You take a mix of soil, get it nice and moist, just like when you're a kid and you're making mud pies, and you put this down in the soil and you pop them out and you have nice little squares, and then you could plant your seeds right in those. So they have different sizes. This is a small one. I like these for turnips because you can plant a whole bunch at one time. You know how turnip seeds are so tiny, tiny, tiny? These work real well. We also have coconut coir. Anybody use coconut coir? Did you like it? How about rock wool?
What is it?
Rock wool. Rock wool is very nice, but the problem with rock wool is you got to soak it in some kind of acid, like lemon water. Squeeze a lemon in some water and let it soak, because it has no acid to it whatsoever.
Where did you get your empty containers that you put in the dishwasher when you like?
These, Burpee.
Amazon has them too.
Amazon has them. HEB sells them in their gardening center. A couple other things about whether you're doing seeds or whether you're doing pots is, if possible, water from the bottom. And the nice thing about this container, you can put some water in there. You can put it down in there, and then you can just watch it soak up. If you can water from the bottom, you're going to do yourself some favors, because we're going to look at a picture of what happens when you don't water from the bottom. You know how you have those new plants that are growing up and looking nice and pretty, and all of a sudden they just drop over? We're going to look at that. Up potting. Up potting is very important. That's when we're taking it from this size to maybe a 4-inch pot. And then we're going maybe to a gallon pot. And up potting is very important, especially in the spring, when it might be early March, and you're not ready to set that tomato plant out in the garden because you know you're still going to have frost. And it's also important in the fall, where you've grown it from seed. You started it in July, and it's still just too hot in August to put that out in the garden. So you just put it up a little bit bigger pot, and you're kind of saving it for when the weather gets a little bit better. Now, transplants, unfortunately, if you're buying transplants like that picture right there, and if you're going to, and I'm not picking on Lowe's, because, obviously I buy transplants at Lowe's like everybody else. I got Bonnie's Best here. But Lowe's and other stores are selling transplants to you when it's convenient for them. They're not selling transplants at the right time when you should be putting them right out in the garden. It's when it's convenient to them. And I think what they're hoping is, if you put them out in the garden,
It's convenient to Bonnie. Bonnie tells Lowe's what they're selling.
true. But what they're hoping is you're going to stick them out in the garden as soon as you buy them, and then it's going to drop down to 28 degrees, and then next week you're there buying them again when it's back up to 75 degrees. So be careful of that. Know your weather. I live down by the Lampasas River, and I can guarantee you when it's 40 degrees here in the morning, it's probably 32, 33 degrees at my house early morning. It's just colder. Okay, grouping in days to harvest. Did I do that right way? Okay. When you're planting your garden, if possible, try to group your crops by the way they eat. Keep your heavy feeders together, and keep your light feeders together, and keep your things that are short days to harvest, like radishes, maybe 25 to 40 days long, in a certain area, as opposed to your cantaloupe that is 100 plus days. And we're going to talk more about that in a little bit. And also, when you're planting, be very aware about your families, like your nightshade families, like your tomatoes, your potatoes, your tomatillas. Anybody grow tobacco here? No? Marijuana. Oh. I'm not sure what family that is. But your nightshade family is your tomatoes, your peppers, your tomatillas, potatoes, eggplants. They're all the same family. So if you plant tomatoes in one area this year, say row 1, Next year, you don't want to plant your tomatoes in row 1, and you're going to try to avoid to plant any of those things in the same family, in that nightshade family, because the insects that like tomatoes are the same insects that like those other plants, the same diseases that like those other plants. And a lot of insects overwinter in the ground. So they're just there, and they're right there. Now realize, hey, I have a 6-row garden. I don't have a choice. I can't only rotate so much. So a couple things you could do is make sure you've added lots of organics. You might want to solarize your soil throughout the winter, because hopefully kill some of those insects that are, overwintering in your area. Or in the like January time frame, if you rototill your soil then, or turn it over, because you're getting that bottom soil and you're moving it up and down. So things that are living in there, you're killing it naturally. Another family to be aware of is like the legume family, your peas, your beans, and your lentils. Try to mix them up if you can. So what do vegetables need to grow? They need sun, they need oxygen, they need water. What else?
Fertilizer, food.
Nutrients, just like us. Need nutrients. Nutrients are very important. Yes.
Would avocados and all that stuff be part of like this grouping or no? Like if you want to do avocados and stuff too, or mangoes,
Yeah.
things like that, would you group it with those two or
No, they're in a different family.
they're different?
Yeah, they're in a total different family.
Because I started some indoor avocado plants and they're probably already, I don't know, they're this tall. And I started it over summer,
Yeah.
so I didn't know if I put it outside or if they just keep it like indoor. Kind of thing.
I don't know, where you live and what your local environment is.
It's right here. Yeah.
So chances are it's going to get a little too cold for that avocado. It's probably going to die back to the ground, but it should come back. But basically, you're starting all over again. So if you keep it in the house, yeah, that's what I would recommend. Otherwise, you're going to be starting all over again probably next March. But it's going to be faster next year, the next go around. It's just that you're starting all over again. Okay, what do we say plants need? Water, nutrients. Okay, according to Texas A&M, there are 16 nutrients that are in our soil. 3 of them aren't really nutrients, they're in the soil, which are the structural elements of carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. Thank you.
You're welcome. Says so right there.
Yes. Now, I'm sure there's 3 nutrients everybody's aware of: nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, NPK. You ever pick up a bag of fertilizer and you see 10, 10, 10. And then you flip it over and then it's got some other stuff in it too. But the 3 main or macronutrients are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And then the secondary nutrients that you see in green: calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. And then our micronutrients, not saying they're not as important, but the plants don't need them as much as they need those other things. All these things are naturally in the soil. But how do we know how much of what is in our soil? Soil test. Okay. Who's done a soil test before? You don't count. You don't count. How'd you do your soil test?
I got the one from Home Depot. I also had somebody at like a actual place to do the little test. They did it in their own little thing in their back room. They talked about
In the back room.
In the back room. In the back room. Okay. Okay. This is a soil test from Texas A&M Soil Lab. I'm not pushing this,
I'll send you that slideshow.
but you know, if you've done one of those soil tests that you get at Walmart where you put in a thimble full of soil and you shake it up and you hold it up and it says, oh, it's red, so it's good. You know, I don't know what that. That sounds like a texture test more than a soil test. But anyway, I would recommend a soil test, and I would recommend that QR code that's on that reference sheet. It can be done online. You go to the soil testing lab and you pick the test. You pick the lab. You want SU. You want soil urban. That's the test you want to take. Soil urban. The best test to take is about $19. You can get them a little bit cheaper, but you fill it all out online, and then you mail them about a pint of your soil, and they explain how to do the soil. If you're doing if your garden was the size of this room, you'd probably want to take 20 samples. You'd want to take a shovel full, then scoop it down, put it in a bucket. You're going to want to mix everything in a bucket and then give them about a pint of that soil. That way you get a good representation of everything that's in your whole garden. This is a pretty big room, so I would hope that if you're starting off vegetable gardening, you're not starting on this size here. Yes, it is. That's a lot of work. So why is it important to know what's in our soil? To know what we need to add. It gives us a baseline of what we have. How much nitrogen, if we look at this soil sample, and I would assume just about wait a minute, I don't need that. Everybody that takes a soil sample in Central Texas is going to be short on nitrogen. Our high pH eats nitrogen, just like it eats some of the other chemicals that are in the ground or elements. You see this line right here? This is called the critical limit. We want to be right of that line, and that means we're in good shape. You can see nitrogen, we're low, and they're recommended 0.6 of a pound per thousand square feet to get it up to where it needs to be. You look at our pH level, 7.4. Ideally, vegetable gardens should be about 6.5. In Central Texas, unless you're gardening in a container or a raised bed, you're never going to get to 6.5. Just isn't going to happen. And I'll explain that in a minute. Now, look, whoops, wrong one. Calcium. 180 parts per million is what we need in calcium. So remember calcium and remember the pH when we go to the next slide. How many bakers we have in here? When you make a cake and you use flour, sugar, eggs, vanilla, do you use equal parts of everything when you make your cake? No. So, same way with our soil. You see the parts per million? Phosphorus, we need 50 parts per million, potassium 175, calcium 180, and so on. So it's the same way. We don't need equal parts of everything in our soils, so our recipe for our soil is just like baking a cake. You know, we're going to need 3 cups of flour, we're going to need a cup of sugar, or we're going to need a tablespoon of vanilla, an egg or 2, whatever. So, that this is our recipe, just like we have a cake recipe. Can't even read my writing. But anyway, okay, calcium. We're in good shape on this soil analysis, right? And we have a 7.4 pH. All right. Now let's look at the effects of pH on soil. If we look at this right here, 7.4, all of a sudden our calcium is no longer to the right of the critical line, or we're short on calcium. Calcium is important because calcium helps with our blossom end rot that we have in our tomatoes, our squashes, our peppers, etc. Normally, if you went to our help desk in Belton and saying, I have blossom end rot on my tomatoes, first thing we're going to tell you is, well, you're watering the wrong way. Because calcium in watering is very important. It's called uptake. And if you're not using a drip system, if you're overhead watering, or you're inconsistently watering, you're not going to get that calcium uptake to that plant like you need. But unfortunately, that might not always be the case. What could be the case is your soil pH. So the first thing we should ask you is, what's your soil pH? And if you say your soil pH is probably 8.2, which is not in the realm of things very, very possible. If you looked at 8.2, you could see we're almost in the red on calcium. So it's very important that you ask yourself, okay, and that's why a soil sample is so important. Not only does it tell you what's going on in your soil, but it also tells you what your pH is, which kind of leads you to a whole bunch of different things. Like, okay, what am I doing on nitrogen? What's it doing to me on phosphorus? What's it doing to me on, calcium, etc. It's very important to know your pH. Yes, ma'am.
If you're using raised beds, and so every year you're going to be adding soil and what have you, do you have to do a soil test every year?
What's your rest? Well, I don't know. I would, because I realize you're adding organics, you're adding manures, you're not adding, whatever. But what are you adding? How much of what? So what does your soil consist of? Do you have an excellent plants where it's like, well, I don't need a soil plant because I'm producing everything I need and the flowers look great?
Guess I don't need it then.
So maybe not. I tested my soil when I first started my garden here about 24 years ago, and I was at 7.9. I tested it the next year and I went down to 7.8, but that was adding sulfur, that was adding pine needles, and that was adding a lot of peat. So I was all happy thinking, well, in 14 years, I'll be down to 6.5. Well, my soil test last year, I was at 7.7. You can make pH go up easily and keep it up, but you can't make pH go down and keep it down. Now, if you want to grow blueberries, azaleas, some other acid-loving plant, my recommendation is to grow it in a container filled with peat moss, because you are never going to keep that pH level down. You might get it down for 1 year, but if you're doing it in a yard or in a flower bed that's in the ground, You're sitting in caliche or limestone. Your water comes from a limestone basin, whether it's from the well or whether it's from the reservoir. Now, unless you're using all rainwater, then you're not adding, but you're constantly adding pH to your soil. So my recommendation is, if you're growing those type of vegetable or blueberries or azaleas or any acid-loving crop, it's about 4.5 area. Do it in a container or a raised bed that you filled with peat, and you can keep it that way. Yes, sir.
Everything safe. Anyway, I have watermelons in my front yard, and I got some 10-10-10, and it was one of those best way to fertilize. Should I just sprinkle some on the plant, or should I go out fast?
And you growing what in the front yard?
Watermelons.
Watermelons? No, I would not put it on the plant. I would put it near the rooting system, but I would scratch it down and then put it in. Never fertilize on top of the ground because the sun will dissolve that nutrient. Yes. Put it down. No, put it, I mean, to me, that's the natural way of doing things. You just toss it down there and like you would manure, but no, synthetic fertilizers need to be inside the ground. Okay. We know we need a soil test. We know that we've done some amendments. We know we have a plan. Let's look at a typical garden layout. Okay, let's assume today is the 15th of March. We're planting corn, we're planting squash, or we're planting beans. Now, it's a week before our last frost date, but those seeds are going to sit in the ground, so we don't care because we know they're not going to pop up. We put out some transplants of tomatoes and peppers, but there's only 6 in each row, so if, we get a frost, it's kind of easy to cover them with a bucket or something. The stuff on the right side are cold, loving crops. Our carrots, our radishes, our turnips, our beets, and our potatoes. They can tolerate some temperatures below freezing. They can even tolerate some temperatures in the mid-20s without a whole lot of damage. Your potatoes might die back a little bit, but it's really not going to hurt the crop that's under the ground. So let's look ahead 60 days. All those plants, because of the way we grouped them, our potatoes, our carrots, our radishes, our beets, and our turnips, we've harvested. We're done with those. Our other plants, our high feeders, our heavy feeders, are still over here. So now we've got some decisions to make. We want to add some more organics to where we just pulled those 7 rows of crops out. So we need to make some decisions. Do we want to put some more radishes in, or some broccoli, or some cabbage? If we look at our planting guide, no. If we do, we'll probably have some nice flowers in about 4 or 5 weeks because those vegetables are going to, what they call bolt. They're never going to form fruit. They're just going to be looking to survive, to take care of themselves, to reseed. So they're not going to do us any good. So if we look at our planting guide, what we want is something that likes warm weather, like okra or cantaloupe. Maybe we could put some more squash in. Maybe we don't want to plant anything. Maybe we're tired of gardening that side. Maybe we want to finish what we have. So we're going to put in some cover crops. Maybe we noticed we had some nematodes in our ground. If we use Elbin rye is a nice trap crop for nematodes. It makes them go away. Or maybe we don't have a problem with nematodes. We just want to put some annual rye in there, which is putting more nitrogen in the soil, or vetch. Or there's a whole variety of cover crops we can put in. Ideally, if we don't plant anything, we want to at least put some kind of cover crop in there because we don't want bare soil. We always want something growing. We always want some kind of roots going into the ground and keeping that soil loose. Okay, let's assume we put in some cantaloupe and some okra. Now, we can just sit back. We have our water on a timer. We're on a drip system. And we can just sit back for the next 90 days and wait for things to harvest. True? No? We got some challenges. We might not know about them yet, but we do have some challenges. Stephanie, what's that weed?
This one?
Yes. Stephanie was just in the Master Gardener course, and we looked at this weed repeatedly. Don't remember that one. That's Matt Amaranth. What's that guy in the middle? You ever see deer peeking in at your garden? Anybody deal with deer, either in their vegetable garden or in their flower beds or everywhere? How about stink bugs? Anybody have stink bugs on their crops? How about armadillos? Armadillos, really, they're not bad. They kind of tell you where you have problems where the grubs are living. Raccoons. Anybody grow sweet corn?
Cantaloupes, there's something eating my cantaloupe.
Cantaloupe. You know those little devils, you know what they do to my cantaloupe? I put electric fence around it now. But they dig a little hole about that size, and they get them little paws in there, and they just scrape it out and pull it. And you pick up that cantaloupe, and it weighs about 6 ounces. Yeah. Yes. I have tried to raise sweet corn. You know the definition of stupidity when you keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. Well, I've tried to raise sweet corn with raccoons multiple years. A fox will take one sweet corn, one ear, they'll pull it off, and they'll run off. So I don't mind sharing with the foxes. Raccoons come in and just start raking every year, sampling it. How about rabbits? Anybody dealing with rabbits with their strawberries or other things? Squirrels? Anybody have a problem with squirrels? Yes. Weeds, besides stealing water and nutrients, some weeds harbor the same diseases as our plants. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit when we start talking about diseases. So that's why it's kind of important you're not going to get every weed, but if you can, try to keep them down to a minimum. A lot of the insects that we have in our gardens, besides chewing on our vegetables, they carry diseases, which is another problem. So let's take a look at some insects. Now, we could probably talk about insects all night long. And in fact, if you're here on the 16th of October, I'm giving a class on insects, friend and foe. Right, I think it's right here. Yeah, I think it's here. But to me, these are oops, I didn't show you, did I? Those are the top 8 insects that damage your garden. I didn't talk about aphids because aphids, although they're bad, they're also food for the lady beetles and the lady beetle larvae. So I didn't talk about them. But the top one right there, the harlequin bug, if you're growing turnips or any kind of greens, beets, they get in there and they can just make a mess of things and eat them up. Squash vine borer. Anybody's experienced squash vine borers? Lovely little things, aren't they? Yes. Squash bugs. Squash bugs. They're actually fairly easy to control. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. Spider mites. Spider mites, yes. They get in there and they just wind everything up. Cabbage loopers. If you're growing cold crops, they can make a mess of things. And they can just sit there and you don't even know you have them. And you peel back some leaves and you're looking at them and it's like, what the heck? Where are all them holes from? How about cutworms? You put out a new plant, a new tomato plant or a new pepper plant, and it looks great. And the next morning you come out and it's just falling over. That's because a cutworm come and wrapped itself around there and ate itself. So you need to put some kind of cardboard protector, like an old toilet paper roll or something, to keep the cutworms away. Leaf footer bugs or stink bugs. Anybody have those on their tomatoes? You know, you got these beautiful tomatoes, they're all red, and all of a sudden you see these yellow spots. You know, the leaf footers, all they're doing is probing. They're not really hurting the fruit if you don't mind eating a little leaf footer spit and sharing with them. It's not hurting the tomato at all. Cucumber beetles. We have the spotted, and then we also have the striped one here. They're bad because they carry diseases. Plus they fly, so they go from one plant to the next plant, to the next plant, etc. Anybody ever had any other insects I'd like to talk about? Yes, ma'am. Roly-polies. You know, those are one of those friend and foe insects because they're a decomposer as well. So diatomaceous earth takes care of roly-polies. We'll get to that. Yep, next slide. Anything else? Anybody else? No other insects in Texas? Tomato hornworms. Well, you know, that's another. But you know, that's another friend or foe plant because they're bad as a worm, but they're a hummingbird moth once they mature. And they become a pollinator. Ideally, what you do is you pick them off and you choose the tomato plant that you want to put them on and let them eat on that. Well, you can do that too. A sacrificial plant. Or you can drop them in a bucket of water. Or step on them. I mean, that green stuff squirts out like nobody's tomorrow. Or you can just pinch them. They are. They're very hard to see.
You cut them, then they drain out, and they're just kind of flat.
Yeah. Yeah. Bunch of sadistic people in here. Yeah. Yeah, they're very hard. You don't see them until all of a sudden it's like, where do all my leaves go? Yeah, I know.
Usually they got on my levels for the tents right now.
Yeah, but you can take a black light at night and they glow like a scorpion. Any other insects? Usually I always hear about grasshoppers. Nobody has problems with grasshoppers? Grasshoppers. Let me tell you how I control grasshoppers. I got I only have one now. I had two pet spiders, two garden spiders, the big black and yellow ones. They're on the big web, and it looks like a little Z, and they just sit in the middle, and they wait for things to come in. I had Charlotte, and I got Charlie. At first, I thought Charlie was Charlotte's old boyfriend because it was much smaller. But Charlie actually ends in Y because she got big all of a sudden. Charlotte left 3 egg sacs behind before she went to the big web in the sky. But what I do is I catch grasshoppers. I gave each spider, and I'm still giving Charlie, 3 grasshoppers a day. You know, when a grasshopper fledges or gets its wings, within about 2 weeks, it mates. Typically, a grasshopper lays 100 eggs a year. So I figured, and the male grasshopper's not around anymore. You know what the female does to the male grasshopper, typically? He eats him, bites his head off. Yeah. 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 But anyway, so if it flies, it has wings, so it's a female. So my assumption is I gave those 2 spiders for about the last 60 days, 3 grasshoppers each. So that's 600 eggs that I'm not going to have in my yard anymore because, and I got some great videos because when I throw them in the web, they spin on it, they spin them real quick, and then they come back to them later. If you come to that class on the 16th, you'll see those videos. And then you can see them where they just kind of suck them dry. And then every once in a while, I can see on the bottom where their web is, you can see dried up, basically shells of grasshoppers that are been sucked dry. Well, Charlotte's no longer here. She did her thing and moved on. Charlie's still active. She has 5 egg sacs right now, which is rare. And I gave her 3 grasshoppers today, and she just stole just as happy as can be. So I figured, well, there's no 300 eggs I don't have to worry about. I have 5 acres, so I have plenty of grasshoppers. I'm not going to run out. At first, for a while, I was having a hard time finding them. I thought I gave them all to the spiders, but apparently not. I use a net. I use a butterfly net.
Don't you, with you keeping your
I couldn't hear.
when you keep your fence all clear, isn't that good for keeping the grasshoppers down?
You know, they say if you don't have any tall grass, the grasshoppers leave. Well, I got grasshoppers and pure dirt. So I don't think that's true anymore. At least not on my house. So to me, these are the top insects that work in our garden. Now there's all kinds of insects, we've got thrips, we got leaf hoppers. You ever see leaf hoppers that just kind of jump? Can't catch them, usually in your okra. So how are we going to control these guys? Chemicals. We could use chemicals. We have imidacloprid. We have 7. We have malathion. We have perithium. We have 3-in-1 sprays that are insecticides, fungicides, and miticides. We don't know if we have a fungicide or mites, but we can put a 3-in-1 spray down. The problem is, if we're using chemicals, besides controlling those bugs, those insects, we're killing the robber flies. We're killing the bees. We're killing the butterflies, lacewings, the dragonflies. What else we killing? Assassin bugs, praying mantis, lady beetles. They're all going away. So we're kind of upsetting the balance of nature. Plus, if you're putting those chemicals on your vegetables, who's consuming those vegetables? Yeah. So, some other ways. Who uses neem oil? No, it's natural. The problem with neem oil is once the temperatures get above about 85 degrees, it's like putting a plastic bag over your crops. You're cooking them. That's the problem with neem oil. But it works. Insecticidal soaps. Anybody use insecticidal soap? You make your own?
Yes.
Did we get lost?
She did.
Insecticidal soaps. You make your own?
Yeah.
What's your formula? You don't remember? Shook it up in a bottle. Okay. If you're making your own, make sure you're using soap and not detergent.
Yeah.
That's the key. A gallon of water and about 2.5 tablespoons of oil and about 2.5 tablespoons of soap, liquid soap. Dawn is good. Murphy. Shoot a stream of water. Knock those aphids off. You know, theoretically, they say you knock them to the ground, they don't have the capacity to crawl back up. Well, I don't know. I've knocked a lot of aphids off, and it seems like they're still there the next day. I don't know. Some of your crawling insects, your diatomaceous earth, your roly-polies. Trouble is, besides roly-polies, your earthworms crawl across it, and it's a very slow death. It can take anywhere from 1 to 4 days once they crawl across that. So if you don't mind a slow murder, well, I'd use diatomaceous earth. Tanglefoot. Who uses tanglefoot? Tanglefoot. That picture right there is a stick like this. You put it in tanglefoot. Did I just move my thing around? Yes, I did. You put it in here. It's real thick. It's like real thick honey. I keep mine in the refrigerator so it stays thicker. And then you just tap your plants. Those are leaf-footed bugs that were on tomatoes. Just tap your plants. Let me put that down before I do it again. I've even the 3.5 inch, 4 inch grasshoppers, those big green ones. You put it on there, you tap them, and they can't get off. Once you fill your stick up, you just stick it in the ground, turn it around, and you make them go away. No, it's sticky. No, you're touching them. You're touching them. You're just touching them. Like right there. Like that G that's on there. I'm just going to take that G off and get it. You see, this is long enough, they don't know what's coming. But my favorite way is to walk up to them and you just pinch them. And you can feel that crush in your hands. It is such a satisfying feeling to know that you got them. And the stink. Well, stink bugs, leaf-footed bugs, they all have that sickening sweet smell. Sometimes that green stuff will slide out. But, yeah. On our previous slide, squash vine borers, normally, if it's a heavy dew morning, they're sitting on top of the leaves. It's very easy to walk up to them. You can either use tanglefoot or you can just pinch them and get them. And all you really care about is the females. The females have the wider, that's a female right there. It has a wider thorax. Yes, squash vine borers. The males it's a little bit thin. The wings are a little bit close. It looks like they're closer together. It's a thinner strip. You don't have to worry about them. The squash bugs, the third picture, 1, 2, 3, squash bugs. The squash bugs hang around on either your zucchini or your yellow squash or whatever you're growing, and they're right down in the crux where it is. What I do is take like a watering can and you dump it on there. You go to the next plant, you dump it on there. The next plant, dump it on there. And the time you come back to that first plant, they've come up to get out of that water. You just okay. Some other challenges. Yellow leaves. God, a yellow leaf could be anything. Now, remember putting nails in the garden to cure our iron deficiencies? Nails are made out of ferrous oxide. It's not water soluble. What we need is ferrous sulfate. That is water soluble, and that is how we get nitrogen in our plants. Typically, an iron deficiency, the veins of the plant remain green, but then the leafy part is what turns yellow. which is totally different than a nitrogen deficiency. The whole leaf will start to turn green. It gets kind of that weird looking light green, and then it starts to go yellow. It gets paler and paler and paler. Magnesium is on the fringes of the leaves, on the outside of the fringe, where manganese starts to turn yellow at the base of the leaf, and a potassium deficiency is on the tip of the leaves. Now, overwatering. You can overwater and underwater and you have yellow leaves. My God, how do you win? Typically, overwatering affects new growth. The leaves that are at the top of your plant, they turn yellow first and drop off. If you have underwatering, that usually affects the older growth first, which is at the base of your plant. So how do we know if our plant has enough water or too much water? A water meter. How many people own a water meter? Everybody's hand should go up. Everybody's hand with their finger, put your hand up with your finger. That is the best water meter right there. You put it down into the soil, and if you get a little bit of dirt sticking under your fingernail, or like me, it's probably already there anyway, you know, but you can feel it. You don't need a water gauge or a water meter. You can use your finger. Since we're talking about leaf color, if you're growing your own plants, especially if you're using coconut coir, and you start to see your plants, the leaves turn purple, it means you got a phosphorus deficiency, which is very common when you're using coconut coir. Okay. Early blight, alternaria. Anybody ever see this on their tomato plants? Brown spots. It kind of has a yellow halo going around it. It's usually pretty typical on tomato plants or pepper plants or potatoes. Any of the nightshade family, kind of susceptible. That's why it's so important if you have tomatoes in here this year. Maybe you want to plant corn there next year. Not potatoes, not tomatoes, not tomatillas, not tobacco, not eggplants, etc. Alternaria. Brown spots with yellow halos, very common. The spots kind of coalesce as it gets worse, and then they start to grow together, and then they form tears. It's spread by spores, so the ideal thing to do would be to mulch underneath your plants. Limit overhead watering. You're going to see a theme here about mulching and overhead watering as we go through this. Crop rotation, like I just mentioned, is very good. Now, it is treatable with the fungicide. This plant right here, we're kind of getting to the point where we might just want to clip that leaf off because it's getting a little bit too far to the extreme where we're just not going to save that leaf anymore. The nice thing about it is it usually affects one leaf. If we clip it off, you don't need to treat it with anything. You can just move on. Powdery mildew. Anybody seen that on their plants? That little white looks like sprinkled powdered sugar on your squash plants. As this progresses, those little white areas will turn brown, and all of a sudden it'll look like a shredded or a very torn up paper sack. You're going to get very papery, brown looking leaves. Treatment's not going to work there. Again, limit overhead watering because it moves by spores. And if you're overhead watering, you're splashing those spores all around to the next plant, the next plant, and next plant. Crop rotation is very important because it sits in the ground. It is treatable. And this is important about weed control that I was talking about. A lot of weeds, especially the broad-based weeds, can get powdery mildew just like our plants can. So that's why it's important to control your weeds. Let's talk about powdery's cousin, downy mildew. Looks a little different. Those little yellow spots, when they first start to appear, you can squish them down and they have water that comes out of them. Again, limit your overhead watering. This occurs mostly as we get later into the season because the heat seems to be attracted to heat. So that's why it's important when you plant early. And then you get, your squash rotation. You might do 3 or 4 rotations of squash during the year. And that eliminates it. It's treatable with the fungicide. And there's also resistant varieties available. And we'll talk more about resistant varieties of plants here in a little bit, and it'll make more sense. Mosaic virus, common in tomatoes. Anybody ever seen this on their tomato plants? That's good. When it first starts off, it kind of looks, got dimples on your leaves, and the leaves begin to get cupped. As it progresses, you can see the photo on the left-hand side where it starts to get darker greens and then you get some yellows. There is no controls, fungicidal controls for these. The best thing that you can do is just pull that plant up and get rid of it. It is transmitted by aphids, whiteflies, cucumber beetles, just to name a few. If you have a plant like this and you're a seed saver, do not save those seeds because those seeds are now infected with mosaic virus. Again, there are resistant varieties available. It is not as common as it used to be, but if you're growing like heirloom tomatoes, they're not resistant to mosaic virus. The tomatoes that we typically grow nowadays, the celebrities, the blue big boys, the better boys, etc., are not susceptible to this because they are resistant to it. But your black crims, etc., since they're an heirloom tomato, are not. Bacterial leaf spot. I show you this one, kind of looks like the first one, except the first one had circular style black spots with halos. This has irregular shapes with yellow going around it. What's important about this one is we probably spread it when we're out in the garden, because if you see it on one leaf and you're harvesting in one area and then you go to another area and you harvest, you just spread it from one plant to the next. So if you see this, you can treat it with a fungicide, or you can just clip the leaf off and get rid of it. And that's why it's very important about practicing cultural controls. Because we are normally our own worst enemy when it comes to spreading diseases. We either spread it with our feet, we spread it with our arms, we spread it with our hands, we spread it a variety of ways. Okay, the evil one, Fusarium wilt. You ever had Fusarium wilt? You have? It's bad. It looks like it's dying from drought. And you can see the two plants up here. The one on the right, thank you, is a resistant variety of tomatoes. The one on the left is not a resistant variety. The only thing you can do for this is to dig it up and get rid of it. Trouble is, Fusarium wilt is a soil-borne disease. There's no cure, and chances are you're going to dig it up with your shovel, and you just contaminated your shovel. You're going to get rid of that plant. Then you're going to go put a new plant in 10 feet down, and you're going to use the same shovel. So now you just transferred Fusarium wilt from this area 10 feet over in another area. Cultural controls. The good thing about Fusarium wilt, and you'll see lots of seed packets that say F on it, and we'll talk about seed packets here in a little bit. That means it's resistant to Fusarium wilt. 20 years ago, this was a big problem. It's not such a big problem anymore. Okay. Damping off. Our poor little guy. It was growing up, looking nice and strong. It was growing out of our container. We had our seeds. They're growing real pretty, and they're getting so high up, growing. And all of a sudden, the next morning, you come out, and he's just sleeping. Put some soil around there and stand them up, make them look tall again. They ain't going to help. Not going to help one bit. It's gone. A couple reasons why this happens. If you're growing your own seeds, you need to use bottom heat and bottom water. That eliminates part of your problem. But the biggest problem that this comes from is cleanliness. Remember? Cleanliness. Cleanliness. Make sure it's clean. If you're reusing your containers, besides being clean, make sure it's disinfected. 10 minutes in a 10% bleach solution or the top rack of the dishwasher. Don't say anything to the wife about the dishwasher. She works with her. And using a soil as starting mix. Don't use soil. Yes, ma'am.
I've purchased a lot of that starting, perlite and different things for different plants. Where do I dispose of this, or do I sanitize it in some way?
To reuse it,
Do I reuse it?
I reuse mine all the time. I spread it out and let the sun do its thing for a couple of days.
Tarp or something?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Cardboard box, just spread it out, sift the box every once in a while. Lots of times what I'll do is I'll just I have like a traditional garden. I just throw it out in the garden too.
Afterwards.
When I'm done, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. If I don't feel like, sterilizing it. But you know how it gets kind of moldy looking and everything? The sun will take care of that almost instantly. If you can, if you're growing your own vegetables and or your own seeds and you're growing them in the house, the morning when you leave for work, if it's decent out, if you can, put them someplace where they can maybe get 2 to 3 hours of sunlight and then the rest of the day of shade. Not all day of sun. They won't like that. Also, as you're growing these, exercise them. When you see them, just wave your hand across. Or if you have a fan, what are you doing, shaking them?
Yeah.
Or a fan, a very light fan where they're just blowing around, because that strengthens them at the where they're going in. Okay, seed packets. You'll see right here when we're looking, this plant, this is a celebrity tomato, and this is resistant against Alternaria or early blight. It's resistant against Fusarium wilt. It's resistant against nematodes. Stemphilium, that is not normally a problem for us right here. That affects northern climates like North Dakota and Canada because of their short growing season. Mosaic virus. It's resistant. And Verticillium wilt, again, not a problem normally for us down here in the south, but it's resistant against all those things.
So like aroma VF, is that,
Mhm.
the V is for the first type? Yeah, and the Fusarium resistant?
Yep.
Is that what that
Yep.
means?
You see like sometimes VF, TMV, all kinds of things. Yep. And then you can just kind of look them up. So lots of times the seed package, you'll just see VF, MT, et cetera. In this, if you go to the seed catalog, it kind of spells it out. That's why I used an extract from the seed catalog. Typically, most our vegetables nowadays are resistant to a lot of things, unless you're growing heirloom type vegetables. They're not. Okay, spring versus fall gardening. Lots of similarities, some differences. The mechanics of spring and fall gardening are basically the same. We want to add organic matter. We want to make sure our soil has enough nutrients in it. We want to make sure we're doing our weed control and our insect control. Doesn't matter whether it's the spring or where it's the fall. In the spring, we're fighting cold and wind. I mean, we want to get our crops in the ground as soon as we can because we know what's coming in late April, early May. The furnace is turning on. So we're trying to get things in the ground when we can. So we're battling late February, early March, trying to cheat a little bit when we can. But we always have the threat of a late frost, or even if we're trying to cheat a lot, a frost in late February. Problem with the frost, if you're still working and you cover your plants with plastic, that bad? If you cover your plants with plastic when you leave in the morning, when you come home at night, you already killed them. Because as soon as that sun came out, that plastic just intensified that heat. And your young plants, whether they're seedlings or transplants, just can't survive. In the spring or in the early of the year, you're battling soil temperatures. Typically mid-February time frame, soil temperatures here are still about 55, maybe 60 degrees. It depends on what type of year we're having. Great for potatoes, onions, some other cold crops like cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, etc. But it's not so good for squash or corn, etc. And if you're growing things by seed in your house or in your greenhouse or wherever, your garage, and you're putting your transplants out, you've got to make sure you acclimate them. You can't just all of a sudden grow these things for 3 weeks and they're nice and pretty. You survived all the other issues with them, then you put them in the ground. Mother Nature's going to kill them. You got to acclimate them. They need to get used to the wind. They need to get used to that sun beating down on them, because even though it might be 70 degrees, that sun's pretty intense when it starts hitting them. Then we have hail. Well, we can't control hail. It happens. We have hail. Remember, our days are getting longer. So as we're putting our transplants out, we got to make sure we're accounting for that because the days are getting longer. On the flip side, in the fall, we're battling the sun and the heat, and we're trying to protect our small plants from the sun and the heat. So before we're putting them out, we're trying to, acclimate them again. One of the nice things about on the fall side, we have this, it's called spun web. That lowers the temperature about 15 degrees. And it's breathable. The nice thing about it, it's not like plastic where you're going to kill anything. but it lowers the temperature about 15 degrees. It also protects you from insects, which is a nice advantage. And there's all kinds of, you can buy individual ones, you can get them for a whole row. This one happens to be a picture from Johnny Seeds. But they work pretty well. Another thing about fall gardening is you have to worry about early frost. You might have an early frost, coming in early October that you didn't plan on. Sometimes if you're planting things by seed, if you didn't buy your seeds in the spring when you brought all your other seeds, it might be hard to find seeds. They're not always readily available like they are in the spring. The days are getting shorter then too. Instead of getting longer, now in the fall, the days are getting shorter. But the nice thing about those days getting shorter is your crops are going to be sweeter because they're turning that starch to sugar much quicker. Some folks claim their cabbage, their beets, their turnips are much sweeter because of those shorter days and those cooler temperatures. Okay, closing thoughts. Finally, right? Compost. If you don't use compost, I'd recommend you use compost. There's a variety of places you can get it. My favorite place to get compost and mulch is down at the Regional Compost Facility, which is, if you're familiar with this side, going down 195 at the transfer facility, you can buy it by the bag or you can buy it by bulk. They will deliver it. There is a charge. You need to call them because prices fluctuate. Regional Compost Facility. Their phone number, I'll give you the phone number. 254-501-3206. They do have a website. And typically they're closed on Wednesdays. But the nice thing about this facility is they are monitored by TECQ. They come out and they do checks on their pile to make sure they're at the right temperature, so they're killing all those bad bacteria that are in there. If you ever go out there and they're moving piles around, you can just see those piles just steaming. If you were here early enough, you saw a bunch of photos just kind of going through and through and through. Those are all photos from the Clean Municipal Court Gardens. We use compost and mulch from them religiously. We get it delivered by the dump truck load.
And honey bunny.
And Bob's Bunny Honey. Bob's Bunny Honey. That's rabbit manure. If you're looking for a manure that doesn't burn straight from the animal, rabbits are good. It doesn't burn. Like chickens, you got to let it sit for a while. Rabbits, you don't have to. Pardon? Worm castings. Yeah. But compost, it releases nutrients back into the soil, whether you're using it with a current year crop or you're just spreading it for a future. Reduces compaction, which is good. Increases earthworm and microbe life, and it increases water holding abilities. Mulch is another good thing. You can reduce your water consumption rates by 30% by using 4 inches of mulch. Mulch also helps deter weeds. I wouldn't say all weeds, because nut sedge is going to grow through mulch no matter how deep it is. It's going to find its way to the top. We're not in a drought right now, but last year at this time we were in a drought. But it's still important because, our reservoirs aren't going to be full forever. And it doesn't look like we've had any. Yes. And we don't have, it doesn't look like there's any rain on the horizon right now. But the nice thing about mulch, it also retains moisture and it creates shade for your soil. We were talking about this before we started. Fall potatoes. If you're planting fall potatoes, you probably save some potatoes from spring. Unlike spring potatoes, that grow fairly easy. Fall potatoes are a little bit harder because you're planting them in early August. And your ground temperature is still probably 90 plus degrees. I always put down about 3 inches of mulch, which helps cool the soil underneath, and it gives those potatoes a chance to take hold. But I'd say routinely they will rot in the ground if they're just sitting there in just pure soil. Drip irrigation. Can't say enough about drip irrigation. Again, we're not in a drought, so we don't have to worry about conserving water. We can just use it willy-nilly whenever we want it. But drip irrigation is 90% efficient compared to a typical sprinkler system, about 65% efficient. And again, if you're using drip irrigation, you're avoiding that overhead watering on your plants, which leads to a lot of diseases. You're making maximum use of what water we have. And then also another nice thing about drip irrigation, you can just kind of weave and wind those things around, whether you're doing a square foot garden or whether you're doing a bed that's shaped like a kidney, you can make it work for yourself. And you're minimizing runoff, which is very important. So on these reference page, obviously the majority of our references came from Texas A&M University. Another good reference is Clemson University. They're basically on the same parallel that we are. So a lot of the things they experience in South Carolina, we experience here. Mississippi State is another good reference. In all these universities are listed are land-grant universities like Texas A&M. Huh?
Oklahoma State.
Are they on there? Oh my God, they are. But they're land-grant universities. So that means they have basically a charter to the public to teach agriculture and horticulture. Mississippi State, University of Georgia is a good one. University of North Carolina, no, not that's University of Southern California. Another good one, North Carolina State. What's that one there? OK State. What is OK State? Oklahoma. Again, similar weather, similar problems. Now, Washington State University. Somebody who was from Western Washington? You lived there for, okay. Washington State's on the opposite side. And the reason I put them on there, they got a lot of good information, but Washington State University is the founding university for the Master Gardener program. It started in 1972. And then the last one that's on there is the Royal Horticultural Society out of England. They have done things since the early 1800s, long before any of these universities even existed. And they got a lot of good information in there. And again, the QR codes are on those pieces of paper for soil testing. And then also the disease handbook. It's pretty lengthy. I wouldn't download it and print it unless you like printing stuff. But you can put it on your desktop before it's there. And then it's got, like, instead of having just one picture of a disease, they'll have hundreds. So you can kind of see it at its early stages, its late stages, etc. Okay, that's all I have.
Thank you.
Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
I'm gonna spend that, you were telling us, you said put it on for like summer, to help roll it.
I cannot hear you.
In the summer, you said to put on that spunland,
Yes,
or in the fall,
in the fall, yes.
and stuff like that. What if you keep it on there, like winter or things like that, to keep it, trying to use it during the?
You can, but it is going to deteriorate. Yeah.
So it's just like, once it, like, cherry.
No, you can use it multiple seasons, but I always pick mine up because I don't want it to sit out there over the winter when there's lots of, when there's more rains, higher winds, and there's really nothing growing under it. I use it in the spring too for insects. Keeps insects out.
So would you best recommend, like, if you're gonna do a raised garden, you just charge it on it?
Yep, absolutely. If you use it's perfect for a raised bed. You can almost make your raised bed, because they have different sizes. You can almost design your raised bed on the sizes that they have available. That's it. All righty. We're adjourned.